Welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. When you're ready to transform your sales for today's transforming market, we've got you covered with your host, the queen of cold calling and founder of Salesology, award-winning author, speaker, sales trainer, and coach, Wendy Weiss.
Hi, welcome to Salesology, conversations with sales leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. And I'm your host, Wendy Weiss. I am the founder of Salesology and the Salesology Prospecting Method. I'm also known as the Queen of Cold Calling. And today, our very special guest is Kurt Euler. He is the Vice President of Marketing and Operations for eXp World Holdings. And he's a successful entrepreneur that's been called the 10X operator and revenue generator for high growth companies. Kurt has built and run multiple businesses from early stages to those with 500 million plus in annual revenue. He has assembled teams across 6 continents, been part of the small team leading an IPO that was $880 million, and later multi-billion-dollar acquisitions. He's actually participated in dozens of acquisitions. Kurt was at the front lines creating several of the marketing and technology channels we all use today, including social media management, influencer marketing, and location-based marketing. And companies bring Kurt in when they need help in overcoming an inflection point in their growth. He's been asked to advise thousands of leaders, from venture capital-backed founders to, and I am very impressed, the President of the United States. If you want to learn how to take your business to the next level, talk to Kurt about how to use high-achieving servant leadership to get there. So welcome, Kurt.
Hey, thanks for having me, Wendy.
Absolutely. So let's start at the beginning here. Back before you were advising presidents, what is the Kurt Euler story?
Yeah, I'm thankful to kind of be blessed with the genes that doesn't require me to sleep very much. My dad slept about an hour and a half a night until his second round of cancer. And so by the time I was 14, I had to start 2 LLCs because there's so many employees in both. And so I've always just been really good at operating. I haven't minded cold calling, as you're very familiar with. And so I've just always been really good at operating and putting in place systems, which makes me uniquely adept for doing sales, marketing, and kind of anything technology related and scaling things. And so I've gone from 14 with multiple businesses to now lots of experience within technology companies.
Wow. So I want to ask you, since you brought it up, you said you never had any discomfort cold calling. Let's talk about that for a moment.
Yeah. I don't know what specific questions. I mean, some cases, there's always a little discomfort, but it still means you have to do it. But
yeah. So how did you get yourself to pick up the phone and talk to somebody you didn't know, especially if you were doing it when you were 14?
Yeah, I didn't even actually think about it. I mean, I was 13 and literally my dad, started with, one of those companies became a pretty successful lawn care company. But he's like, look, you can use my equipment if you want to for the house, if you want to start making some money. So I started knocking on neighbors' doors and I didn't realize, that's basically cold calling. I mean, big neighborhood, I didn't know most of them. And literally by the end of the second week, I had more houses than I could service myself. So I was like, well, I can go get a friend to do this work. And it just kind of clicked. It said, wait a second, selling is the hard part. And actually doing lawn cares, it's difficult work. But I'm like, I had a lot of friends that I started to employ. And I was like, the only thing that limits this growing is me knocking on more doors for people that don't know me or asking for referrals. And it just kind of always clicked from that point, including getting into new businesses where I believe everybody in every position of a company should spend 3 to 6 months cold calling. Like, you need to be told no over and over to realize that how you're describing the product, the service, the value, the problem are not useful to the person you're trying to sell to or your customers. And so I always do that myself. I try making everybody on the teams do it as well.
I love what you just said about if what you're saying isn't working, isn't resonating, you need to learn that. And it's not that the activity of cold calling doesn't work, it's that you're not doing it well. My first career, I don't know if you know this, Kurt, or some people in our audience may know it. My first career was I danced in a ballet company, and Cincinnati Ballet and Pittsburgh Ballet Theater. And I used to have a teacher that would say to us, if you fall down, you are doing it wrong.
Okay.
And that pretty much sums it up.
Yep.
Yeah. So I want to ask you about servant leadership and what exactly does that mean?
Yeah, so I'm a big proponent of kind of this approach of high achieving servant leadership, where it's the opposite of how most people actually lead. Most people lead by their authority. I'm your boss, therefore you'll make cold calls because I tell you to. You'll put things in the CRM because I tell you to, and you'll get in trouble if you don't. And so that hierarchical leadership approach, it really amounts to micromanaging and people feeling like they're not trusted. And it's horrible for developing new leaders. Servant leadership takes the much different approach. It says, look, my job as the leader is to actually serve you, to help multiply myself by giving you room to fail, but also sitting up alongside of you and doing the work so that you get better. You never learn woodworking by somebody just giving you a book or a YouTube video. You're going to learn it much better by going alongside of a master carpenter where he or she shows you how to do it, tells you what you've done wrong. And when you take that approach to how do you grow people, lead teams, it's the complete difference between like telling people go do this versus come on, I'll show you how to do it. And that's okay.
All right. So how exactly does that work? Because I know you've worked with teams of different sizes, different cultures. Yeah. How does that change if you're, say, a small business owner with a small team versus maybe an enterprise level company? How does this concept change?
I'm not sure as a leader that you show up any differently. It's just that at more at the enterprise level, you're needing many more people in the company to do that with you. And so the example I give sometimes, and so big company, not always a company that people necessarily love, but Chick-fil-A. So Dan, Kathy, early on there. And so I knew somebody who he was, I know a number of people that have known him, but he's at a conference in kind of an internal large Chick-fil-A conference, and they're waiting for the big speaker, which is going to be Dan. And so somebody's coming around and they're collecting drinks and they're hanging things off. And he gets kind of a nudge and he's kind of like annoyed because he's like, I'm trying to hear about the next like intro speaker coming up. And it was actually Dan Cathy with a bucket of things helping collect stuff because they were short on staff that day. So it's his company. He's the CEO. This is all of the senior leaders in the company. And he's busting tables basically because that needed to be done. Wow. Like that completely just changed it. Like you wouldn't get that at most Coca-Colas. You're not going to get that at Disney today. And so at a small business by nature, we tend to do that. If my front desk person is missing phone calls, well, I can either yell at them, which isn't very effective and chances are they may not show up, or I can just pull up my chair next to him or her and say, hey, let's take the next 10 calls together and you see how I do it. And then take the next 10 calls and coach them through that. And so I think that's how it shows up, but it's different at a bigger company. A lot of times is that you may not get down to the frontline people unless you're really intentional on it. And in that case, you only get down to the front line if you're at a large enterprise by doing it with a few people to find out if the system is working well, if it's permeating well.
Okay. So I've read that when you talk about high achieving servant leadership, that actually enables you to scale a business. And
way faster.
Way faster. And why is that?
I think a lot of times it's that people feel safe to try new things. I mean, I believe that I'm good at sales. My numbers show that I've been very good at sales and operating, but I also know that there's always better ways to do things. And so if I just give you, hey, this is what you have to follow and you can't do anything else, there's never going to be any new innovation that comes in that process, whatever part of the company it's in. And so that's a lot of how that kind of works. But on the other side, it's like, people want to show up to work, and it's like, I'm not looking for somebody to hit their numbers. I mean, that's important. But if I'm trying to grow the company by 5%, 20%, we can do that. And people don't have to respect you or even like you. But if I'm wanting to 50x the company this year or 100x it over the next couple of years, I need people that are committed to going to war with me, not people that are committed to just making a phone call. And so they're only going to do that if they think I actually care about them and love them, and the same thing back and forth. And so to show up differently with them, to say, hey, I know that you have an elderly parent you're dealing with, and so you couldn't hit your numbers this week. Like, showing up that way for the people that work on your team, they will go above and beyond for you as well, and not just do something because you tell them to, but because they believe there's actually a purpose behind it, which isn't just that they may like me, but it's also me stepping in and going, hey, if I haven't explained what our company's trying to do in the market and helping people, you have the safety to say, Kurt, what you just said makes no sense to me. Explain it again. And it takes a different approach, a servant leadership approach, to provide that safety where people feel comfortable basically saying, hey, I didn't show up well to them, or I didn't explain things well to them. And then that's on me as the leader, not on them.
So how do you know, if you are the business owner or a manager, how do you know when you're being that servant leader versus because you might think that you're doing these things and showing up for people, and yet they don't think you're showing up for them. Yeah. So how do you know?
I hired somebody, a great overall person. I think that he's going to develop into a wonderful leader, but everything in their descriptions is he would have identified as a servant leader. I read him that way. And when we kind of got into working together, he was a very hierarchical, much more micromanaging, separating church and state kind of parts of the team, which isn't at all what I thought I was getting. And he shifted a whole lot and he become a lot better. But it's like, so that case, he would have, to exactly your point, he would have shown up and said, I'm a servant leader. This is what everybody that's worked for me before would say. And in the first 3 months, I'm like, nope, not the case. Wonderful, smarter than I am, but didn't show up as a servant leader. It takes one, asking people that have worked with you before. So those of us that have been in business a little while, it's much easier to go back to somebody that worked for me at a different company and to ask them open-ended questions and exactly that, because their paycheck's not based on my response. And so I like going back to people that have worked for me in previous years or previous companies and ask them. But there is a lot you can ask, though, still. You can ask, but it's more of how people show up. You need to be asking questions about, one, people need to come to you openly and tell you that they messed something up or that they have a problem that they caused with, and if they're not doing that and you're just uncovering those things, you're not a servant leader, I assure you. Because servant leaders, people will not always come to you, because a lot of times we have PTSD from past bad bosses, but that needs to happen sometimes. On the other side, I love asking questions in one-on-ones and saying, hey, what question should I have asked you that I didn't ask you? What am I wrong about? What could I possibly be wrong about in the business today that I don't realize it? And actually hearing legitimate suggestion. I love that question anyways. I actually go through that on a weekly basis. What could I be wrong about in my business today? But I ask that of people that work for me. And sometimes they're right and sometimes they're wrong. But if they're just quiet, or they only go, I think we're doing pretty well, you probably are much more in the hierarchical, authoritative leadership than a servant leadership style.
So how do you know, because you had said previously that you don't want to be micromanaging people and you want them to give them the room to fail. Mm. If you have someone that's working for you and their job is to execute something, and they're not, at what point, like, how do you make it work? How do you get them to execute what you need them to execute? Coming to you with ideas is great, but if the idea is, I don't think we should do this, and you want them to do it, like, how does that all work?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, there's always work that we all have to do at any level. I mean, whether you're the boss or not, where I may not want to do it, but this is the task before me. And so that's very key. If I hired an SDR, their job is to go set up appointments for me. They need to be doing that in and out. But generally, I'm paying people on salary or sometimes with commission as well. And so it's different than an hourly worker, but even there, it's like, there's the core job I'm paying you for, and I do expect you to follow that. And so I am okay with you changing the SOP a little bit to for testing, not all the time, but if you're like, hey, on these 10% of calls, I tried this, and here's the results I'm getting. I'm okay with that. If you tried it at 90%, I'm probably not okay with that. But I think the bigger part is, especially from a comp perspective, like, we're paying somebody for full time. But as I mentioned, I want people that are willing to go to war for me. And so with that, I hope I've explained to them the purpose that our company is here, what the mission really is. And I've helped understand what their personal purpose is and how those two overlap. And if that's the case, well, you may have done what you were tasked for doing for 40 or 50 hours and still felt enough about where there's an overlap between what the company's trying to do and your personal purpose, that you said, hey, look, I was trying this on Saturday to see if it worked because I know what we're trying to get to. And the person will come back from those times. And that's where that's where that margin tends to come a good bit more. Hey, somebody shows up early. I had somebody on my team literally this morning at like 7:15. I happen to be at my desk working already, but he normally doesn't start till later than that. Hey, I was working on this over the weekend. I thought you might want to see what the results are. That's awesome. Like that's the type of flexibility where they can try something or research something or come up with ideas. And that could be during daytime hours, but that's one of the things I like about from a, like, hourly work's great, but commission and salary, look, we're in this together, and there's a mountaintop we're trying to go to. And so here's your job, but if you have other ideas that there's tasks to be done, feel free to try some things.
And I would imagine, and I know you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but I would imagine that this makes it so much easier to hire good people and keep them, because you can't read the news or watch the news, listen to the news without hearing about how hard it is to hire people, and then they quit. So I would imagine taking this type of approach would make that whole process a lot easier.
I think it does. It also changes who you're hiring, because I'm hiring for certain characteristics that are not what somebody could say they are. I work well with people. I'm looking for traits that and I want examples. I want superhero stories from the woman when I'm interviewing her that says, hey, do you have a bias towards action? Do you I literally will hire for a trait of strong opinions held loosely. There's a problem. I don't want you to just tell me the problem. I want you to have a strong opinion about what we should change that, but be open to that might not be right. And usually somebody can show that through their past experiences, and I'm hiring towards those things. And then that's a moving ship. We can steer that a little bit to help to guide it. And people want to be in an environment where, hey, I can come up with an idea, and you may say, I don't like that one, but let's go back to the problem you found and iterate on that. Somebody who said bias towards action, especially in sales. If somebody's not willing to pick up the phone and call, like, that's a problem. Like there's customer success may do other things, but it's like, by nature, like, I have somebody on my team, this guy, gentleman named Scott. He's not in a sales role, but he has a sales background. One of the dominant reasons I brought him into the roles that he's in, and he's been promoted to a new role, is that if anything seems to be going wrong with an outside person, he'll pick up the phone and call him. That's his gut nature. I want to call to say, Wendy, tell me what's going on.
Yeah, that is good news. So we're going to pause for a moment for a word from our sponsor. When we come back, Kurt, I actually want to switch gears a little bit, because we had such an interesting conversation before this podcast interview about networking versus net weaving. So I want to address that. But we are going to pause now for a word from our sponsor, Salesology. 81 tools to grow your sales and your business faster, more easily, and more profitably. Are you stuck because you can't find the right sales and marketing resources to help you grow your business? Or maybe you're sick of spending hours hunched over the computer, researching and looking for what you need instead of selling and generating revenue. Or maybe you're frustrated and confused because you can't find what you need at an affordable price. Never fear, Salesology has you covered. Because we've done the research, we have vetted all the sales and marketing tools, so you can save hours of work because you no longer have to hunt for what you need. Download 81 tools to grow your sales and your business faster, more easily, and more profitably. It's free. Just click on the link in the show notes and you will be glad you did. And we are back with our special guest, Kurt Euler, who is the Vice President of Marketing and Operations for eXp World Holdings. And Kurt and I had a very interesting conversation a while ago about networking versus net weaving. So could we start with some definitions? What's networking? What's net weaving? What's the difference?
We can. They look very similar when somebody shows up to an event or you're working through your CRM. Both are going to involve, most of us are very familiar with networking. I'm trying to broaden my network. But by its nature, networking, as I find out, and there are some people that they think they're networking, but we'll use the term net weaving in a minute. Networking tends to be selfish to me. And so I hear so many times, especially on the sales side, and SMB side, where people are like, I just keep trying to network and it's hard on me to do, or it's not productive. I'm not seeing the ROI out of it. And when I ask questions, what ends up happening, and not everybody is this forthcoming, but people are going and you can watch them go around in a room and they'll start meeting people. They'll shake hands and get cards and they'll pick up a card and they'll go and they look at it. And as the person's telling them about themselves, they realize this person can't add value to what I'm trying to do. And they almost throw the card away. They may never follow up with that person. And whether we realize it or not, that's implicit in the concept of networking. I'm trying to go out and see what I can do to broaden my network for my business and my person. Net weaving is the servant leadership approach of that. It still looks very similar. And in the end, I do hope it will probably help my business, but it's trying to create a position where I'm the trusted resource of my community. I'm going out and I may meet you, Wendy, for the first time at a conference. And all I'm trying to do is understand who you are, what your needs are, and is there anything I could do to help you now or in the future? And so my follow-ups to that are going to be very different. Networking, I'm going to go tell you about myself. Net weaving, gosh, I might be able to fundamentally change your business by just taking 10 minutes and making an introduction for you. And in the end, hopefully that will come back around and help me, but that's not, I'm doing it because I'm wanting to help the people that I'm meeting in my community. And it's great sometimes for in this company or in 10 years, somebody that may come back and say, hey, you helped me back then. But the referrals completely change because we're all used to being selfishly networked. And when somebody actually steps out nowadays and says, how can I help you? And they actually follow through with that, man, you remember that person and you will come back to them. You will refer business to them and you will do things that you can want to help them because we have a nature of reciprocity where we want to help people, but that's just not most of America nowadays.
I would have to agree with that. So how exactly do you do this? You meet someone, they introduce themselves, you introduce yourself, and then what happens?
Yeah, so it depends on a lot. I find a lot of places I would go to. I love people still use business cards. I have an index card to illustrate. I always have a fast drying ink pen, so I can turn over your card and I can write a couple of notes. And when I do that, I have a system in place. So I will sit down and go through all of those on a weekly basis. And I kind of allocate at least 10 minutes for every person that I've met to follow up with. And it may just be to make an introduction I said I'd make because, hey, you're trying to grow your business in this part of the community and I can connect you. It may be following up to say, hey, here's a book I can give you or something. Or it may just be to follow up and if I haven't figured it out and say, hey, let's get time later. but I intentionally follow up with every person. And then I keep those notes. I take notes and I put those into my CRM. And so example I think I gave when we spoke before, my youngest daughter just turned 1 a couple of months ago. And so 3 people in my network sent me text messages about her, and 2 of them sent me a video of it. So that means somewhere in their system, now it's possible one of them might have actually seen it on Facebook, like a reminder or something, that my daughter was born. But 3 of them had an innocent, trusted system that said, Kurt's daughter was born on this day in the NICU. One of them mentioned that. And they then took out their phone and did a quick little video message to follow up. That's what net weaving looks like. It means that they care about me enough as a person to know that my family's important to me, and those special milestones that are also really good trigger events to follow up on. Because who else would follow up on that timing? People follow up on Christmas and New Year's, and hey, here's some random holiday. It's a reason to send people out. Never like, here's your kid's birthday, your anniversary with your husband or wife.
Congratulations, by the way.
Thank you.
So you literally ask, how can I help you?
I ask,
and you write it down.
I ask how I can help you, or I'll ask, what are a few things you're struggling with right now? And keep in mind that when you ask that question, some people will give you an accurate answer. Most people's initial response, especially in that first interaction, will be a lie, but they don't intend it to be. Especially if they're a leader of a team or a company, what they will tend to respond with is the most pressing thing that came through their inbox or their door that day, which actually isn't the most important thing in their business. It's just what's top of mind, but they want to respond. But I'm going to ask some questions like that to try to uncover, what's going on in your business that I might be able to help with. And that's kind of the nature of me following up with as well, is trying to find out what's real there, and not in a way where I'm trying to sell you something. It is that there are times where I may be at a company that has the product or solution for you. But even then, a lot of times we can still help people where, hey, my sales tools might be helpful. But instead, what you need right now is just this little bit of coaching to say, you're on this right path. I tried this other thing you're trying. That repeatedly doesn't work for me. And that's just a benefit to them.
So I'm curious because you said a great number of people, when you ask the question, will you say they don't mean to lie. They say what's topmost in their inbox. But also, I have found people are often very hesitant to tell a stranger that something is the matter.
Yeah.
And so you won't get an accurate answer just because nobody wants to, or a lot of people do not want to be perceived as not being on top of everything.
Right. And
so to break that down, I think takes time, which is where your follow-up comes in.
It takes time, and it also you can't accelerate it even in that initial 5 or 10 minute intro, depending on if you're willing to be transparent about yourself, or especially if it's in a community where you're selling or serving a lot, you often know the problems that other people are having. And so it's something that's things that have come out from other things. And so I might say, hey, Wendy, I know a fair number of people that are in insert whatever, where you see your niche, and go, here's some of the things that I hear from them that they're struggling with. I'm struggling with kind of this, do you have anything like that you're going through right now? At that point, I've also started to bring up, I know you, because I probably named the 1 or 2 things that people like you or in your position are struggling with. And you're much more likely to go, whoa, she knows this stuff here. And both of those things, being authentic myself, but also saying others like you tend to be struggling with one of these 2 things, especially when they're trying to uncover that inflection point or move past that inflection point. People go, maybe they can actually help me. And so it accelerates things a lot, but it does take a changing of your wording.
Yes. And that willingness to be open.
Right.
Because if you're not going to be open, then probably the person you're talking to isn't going to be that open either.
Right.
So then you're just throwing the business cards back and forth at each other and moving on.
Yep. Yeah. Well, especially, you may be trying to take a net weaving approach, but the person you're meeting, they're in that selfish networking approach. And so you can actually use that to your advantage as well. So based on where you're at, now those of us that have been rather successful in different areas, people are a little bit more willing sometimes to be like, oh, they might see value that I could help them in their business. And so when I ask a question that's very open, Kurt could actually help me. And so I have a little bit of an easier time sometimes than somebody that's new to the business or new to an industry might be. But you can still use that to try to unlock and relate the relationship a little bit. You can also borrow it a lot from if you're with somebody that they know or that they respect as well as the conference. I am a huge believer in kind of tag teaming the net weaving approach. I mean, networkers do it too, but if we're at a conference and you and I have interacted a number of times here, we're going to use each other to open those relationships. And knowing that I may be taking a net weaving approach as you would, then we can use that when, hey, let me go introduce you to Wendy over here. And then you may open up that kind of a little bit more, open, authentic approach as well. And it just helps the whole relationship.
And I was reading I know you have a gift for all of our listeners, and I'm going to ask you about that in just a moment. But I was reading through it, and what I loved is you said you could be an introvert and this would still work.
Yeah.
And could you talk a little bit, speaking as someone that is an introvert, I would like to hear more. Why does this work for introverts too?
Yeah, it's a great question. Introverts, I find when I tell them that, like, hey, you listen to somebody try to describe networking for them. You watch people that go through a course on networking, or they listen to a coach, and you can watch like the hair on their back kind of gets up when it's like, I don't want to go talk to people. Well, because so much of networking is talking about me. It's trying to solve my problem. Introverts usually, though, like if my definition of the introvert, and I know some people vary, but an extrovert gets their energy from other people. An introvert, other people sometimes tax me. Well, a lot of times that's because I'm going out and you're trying to sell yourself. But an introvert usually also tends to be a little bit more of a servant leader. And so that's why selling, sometimes networking, is scary to them. And so when you tell them, stop selling yourself, stop selling your product, your job is just to help people that are in this conference or in your community or your neighborhood, your church, your synagogue. That's different to them. It doesn't bring up the same visceral fear that tends to trigger an introvert, where it's like, I'm scared of talking to people. No, you're wanting to talk to people because you're interested in them, not trying to talk about yourself. And I find it's a lot easier for introverts to get started that way because they never have to talk about themselves.
Yes. And so for all of our introverts that are listening today, it's just a little mind shift that makes it easy and possible. So I love that. So tell us now, Kurt, I know you have a gift for all of our listeners. So tell us about your gift.
Yeah, so I have a pretty lengthy and in-depth guide on networking versus net weaving. And so it's called The Definitive Guide to Net Weaving versus Networking, Becoming the Trusted Resource in Your Community. And it walks through a lot of this, kind of industry agnostic, but also some examples there. But much more recently, I've been in real estate for the last 5 years and on the technology side. And gosh, I can watch these highly successful real estate agents, which are largely salespeople that are earning $500,000 a year. And I would look at them and go, they're an introvert. They're completely would follow a servant leadership approach. And I go, why are they successful? Well, it's the same reason that net weaving works in all of these other industries, because they understand the difference between the two. And this guide walks them through that.
And we are going to post the link to this guide in the show notes. So as soon as you finish listening to this podcast, the moment that you finish listening to this podcast, click in, go to the link, click on it, and you can download the guide, and you'll be really glad you did. It's so helpful. And so I want to thank you, Kurt, for being here with us today. Will you do me a favor, please?
Sure.
Would you put your hand over your heart and promise me that you will come back so that we can keep talking about this?
I'd be happy to.
Okay, wonderful. So you have been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders. Our special guest, Kurt Euler, Vice President of Marketing and Operations for eXp World Holdings. And if you have found value in today's podcast, then think about one business owner or one sales professional, one leader that you know that you think might also find value in this podcast. And please share the link with them. And until we meet again, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, really large bills.
You've been listening to Salesology, Conversations with Sales Leaders, the art of faster, easier, more profitable sales. Be sure to follow so that you don't miss a single episode. And while you're at it, please leave a rating and review, and be sure to share it with your friends. Tune in every week for more exciting insights and wisdom on transforming sales. And until next time, visualize yourself surrounded by cash, very large bills.